and welcome to The Nation Speaks. I'm your host, Cindy Drucare. The political situation in the country has been developing at an almost unbelievable pace since Wednesday, making it a very stressful time for Americans of, frankly, all political stripes. And from the comments that we're getting at NTD, it's affecting people around the world. We thought it would be useful to take a few steps back and get some perspective on the situation. Here to help us do that is Joshua Philipp. He's a senior investigative reporter with the Epoch Times and the host of a very thoughtful show, Crossroads. Joshua, welcome.
Hey, great being here, Cindy.
So there's a lot of frustration, I'd say bewilderment, fear in the country right now, particularly among Trump supporters, but in other quarters too, as I mentioned. For 5 years, we've seen mass Trump rallies across the country. They've always been completely peaceful, positive, patriotic. You and I were both at the rally in D.C. on December 12th. We were covering that, and we mentioned several times about how few police there were and that the police know they can relax at Trump events because people are so respectful and supportive of law enforcement. So in that context, the events of last Wednesday seem a little surreal. And what's followed has been an alarmingly rapid set of actions by social media companies to essentially shut down free speech. Trump has been banned forever from Twitter. He's been shut out of Facebook and even Parler, which is an emerging popular platform for conservatives because of the lack of censorship. Even there, Google removed the app from the Google Play Store for its, quote, moderation policy, and that came after President Trump tried to post messages there. Apple's considering doing the same thing. Other prominent figures have also been shut down from social media, including General Michael Flynn, Sidney Powell, the lawyer at the forefront of pursuing the election fraud cases. And amidst all of that, Democratic leaders Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, they want to pursue impeaching President Trump in the last few days of his administration. So these indeed seem to be times that try men's souls, which isn't to incite revolutionary violence, as Thomas Paine, but it does seem a bit of an apt quote for the mood of many. So, Josh, I want to get your perspective from a 30,000-foot level. I just kind of gave us the details of going on, but from the 30,000-foot level, how do you understand the current situation in the country?
Well, big tech has been pushing this type of censorship for a long time, but they felt that they were under threat of having their Section 230 protections removed, and so I think they were holding back a little bit. A lot of the media has been pushing these narratives for the past 4 years. It's just that they were attacking Trump directly, and attacking everybody, including Trump, wasn't really so much of a focus. Although you have to think of all the people they deplatformed over the past 4 years, the number is quite high. You know, I think from one perspective, these big tech companies, these big media companies, they believe that they can be the gatekeepers of information. And they believe that they can alter information and censor information based not just on, say, criminal content, but based on things that they themselves decide should or should not be said on their platforms. And so you do have very strong politically motivated censorship taking place. At the same time, a lot of these media companies believe they can be the gatekeepers of what is fact and what is not. And because of this, they believe that they can alter the interpretation of events. They are misframing these events. They're falsely reporting on these events. They're putting things out of proper context, when at the same time, if you look at the protests that happened in the past several years, and of course you could argue that yes, disrupting the counting of the electoral votes is pretty terrible from a political standpoint. But these individuals were also trying to interrupt the electoral vote last year. Last presidential election. You might remember they were even threatening, for example, the electoral voters, the people going to cast their electoral votes. People were receiving death threats. There's a double standard when it comes to these things, and the double standard is being used to feed this broader media narrative, and the broader media narrative is being used to serve a political purpose. And I do think most Americans who did support Trump or still do are feeling that pressure because Trump has been removed as somewhat as like the shield who was taking all the flack for a lot of America. And these individuals now, these media companies and these social media companies, believe that they can now target people directly for previous support of Trump, for statements they made offline, for anything, and they're deeming these types of statements as signs of radicalism, is the current state of things.
Right, and we're hearing that that I don't know how many people were at the rally in DC on Wednesday. I think you've said about 500,000. I think I've seen that number around. That everyone who went is some sort of terrorist or insurgent or something like that. So I think there's a lot of people in the country are feeling unfairly maligned. I've even heard reports of people being identified as going to the rally getting fired. What are your thoughts for those people right now? It seems like a lot of like you said, the fire that was aimed at Trump earlier is going to get spread out a little more.
Well, people are being lied about, is the reality of it. They're being lied about, their intentions are being misframed, and the interpretation of history of what happened on January 6th is being altered. And so people do feel that they're being misrepresented, and they feel that the misrepresentation of what took place is being used as an excuse to attack them. Really, I think the important point is that these individuals would not attack you if they did not feel that they were at threat themselves. If they did not feel that, for example, people having their own voices independent of the narrative they're trying to push was a threat to the narratives they're trying to push, they would not need to censor people if they didn't think that was an issue. At the same time, they also believe that maybe these ideas are threats to their own political interests, and so they're doing everything they can to censor people and to also push people down and silence them essentially for the start of what they believe will be an administration serving their own political interests. And it's I would say, on one side, a terrible start to the Biden administration if that does happen, which it does seem to be the case right now.
What do you think should be, or what do you expect might be the next move? I mean, Trump has, talked about, it's actually, in a lot of his supporters, it's not about him. There's sort of a movement that started. You're, a student of social movements, and you understand quite well how these things work. Where do you expect this to go?
I'd say one of two directions. One would be that, again, Trump has been promising his supporters that they will not be silenced, that something may be happening. People, I think, are losing hope at this point in that anything will happen. And people are wondering what he means by that they do feel attacked, and so he's saying they're not going to be attacked, they're not going to be maligned, and so on. They already feel that way. And so I think on one level, there's a lot of people thinking that Trump may do something. We're not seeing any signs of that right now. We'll have to see. On the other side, we're seeing this growing trend that, again, was targeting Trump mostly for the past 4 years, but is now turning its sights on pretty much every conservative in this country. From the social media, from big tech, from politicians, and from the mainstream media, basically labeling them and attacking them all directly. I think the goal with this is to silence people. The goal with this is to make people give in, to surrender their values, and to, adhere to this new set of values that's being presented to them. And in the face of this, I'd say that we've seen things like this happen in many countries in the world, China being one of the biggest examples of this. But even there, for example, people facing decades of persecution, much worse than this. People even there have not given up their faith. They've not given up their beliefs. They've not abandoned their values. And even though they do face persecution, they've actually turned the situation around in China to a large extent, although the government still has its persecutions. On the grassroots level, all the people know the truth. And I think that can be the situation in America as well, that regardless of what big tech says, regardless of what big media says, regardless of what big government says, as long as people are not afraid to speak the truth, I think people will know the truth and they'll understand what's taking place. And that limits the extent of the ability of these things to really persecute people and go after people.
It's a good point that you raised, because obviously in China, the situation is far worse. People are, taken off to forced labor camps. People have been, tortured and killed. There's also mass electronic surveillance in China with the, social credit system and all of that. And yet people have, the truth has gotten out. How have they been doing that?
A lot of word of mouth, actually. Just people not being silent about what's taking place. People cursing the Chinese Communist Party. Even during the pandemic, people going out on their their balconies and shouting into the night sky curses at the Chinese Communist Party. They on social media, online, they have Chinese netizens, and they have funny ways of using, you know, words that sound like other words in order to criticize the CCP because they can't say it directly, and they have this real funny humor that's going to come about through this. It is not unusual now for people to curse the CCP, and despite the weight of the persecutions in China, actually a lot of people do not fear the CCP. And I think in the U.S. as well that there is a lot of fear right now because people, when you don't know what is going to happen, and you feel you're being attacked, and you don't know what the goal of those attacks are, it's natural to feel afraid and concerned, especially when you see them going after your reputation and lying about you and trying to get you fired from your job. These things are happening right now. They really are happening right now. But at the same time, I think as long as people speak up, as long as they don't let themselves fall into silence, as long as they don't abandon their values, these things will have a limited impact.
Yeah, and I've also heard, a lot of people saying, okay, it's 4 years. We can, make it through, do the things you're talking about. Or even in 2 years, there's, the midterm elections. This is just politics. Do you think that's the case?
It is just politics on one end. And again, a lot of these attacks are not coming from the Biden administration. A lot of these attacks are coming specifically from big tech, big media, and a handful of, very far left politicians who, have really been making similar statements for the past 4 years anyways. It's just that, again, the censorship is trying to blanket censor anybody of dissenting viewpoint. And again, I think the biggest way to stand up against censorship is to just not be censored, to not allow yourself to be censored. And keep in mind, being censored online is not the end of the world. How many of us who post on Facebook actually believe our friends and family see those messages anyways? The way even the normal algorithms work in terms of limiting the spread of posts is very, it's pretty severe actually. It's more effective to call up your friends and family, say hi to them directly, go talk to them, go spend time with them. I think face-to-face interaction and direct communication, these types of things are things we've always had. And really, these big tech platforms that we've been using, that we rely on, your ability to speak your viewpoints on them is limited as it is anyways. And actually, I'd say much less impactful than direct communication. And so it's not the end of the world on that note. And also, this leaves room for independent companies to come up and build their own new platforms as well.
So we're going to wrap up here, but, as you were speaking, it's worth saying, to our audience, the NTD and the Epoch Times were actually, born to expose the crimes of communism in China. And since, last 20 years, since we've been around, been under constant attack and censorship in China, of course. And yet, the media has grown among Chinese audience and word has gotten out. So we know a thing or two about how to get the word out.
Yeah, that's true. We're an example of something that was born out of censorship. And again, a model that actually, when you are censored and when you are persecuted, actually you can stand up and build something great. It's just a matter of not letting yourself be silenced.
Exactly. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Josh.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
Next, on Friday, Speaker Nancy Pelosi had a call with her Democratic colleagues, and they discussed removing President Trump in the final few days of his term in office. Articles of impeachment are now circulating, and they're expected to be presented on Monday. With us now is Rick Green. He's a constitutional attorney, a former Texas state representative, and a constitutional educator. Rick, welcome.
Good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
So it looks like the Democrats could introduce these articles of impeachment against President Trump using the 25th Amendment as early as Monday. They're arguing that it's too dangerous to allow Trump to stay in office until Joe Biden is inaugurated on July 20th. So if this is introduced Monday, that would only be 9 days later. It would seem impossible to carry it out in so little time. It looks like one of the article of impeachment looks like it will be about incitement of insurrection, stating that Trump engaged in high crimes and misdemeanors by willfully inciting violence against the government of the United States. Can you first just take us through what the 25th Amendment says and how it works?
Yeah, it feels like we have a Ministry of Truth in Orwell's 1984 happening right now, a total rewriting of history. And if you hold the levers of power in government, I guess you have the opportunity to do that. And this is their way of, uniting the country, of course, and bringing us all together in the final 10 days of a president's term. It's shameful. It's actually extreme, and it's actually insightful. They are creating a dangerous, dangerous situation in our country. But to your question, 25th Amendment very simply is designed for when the president is truly incapable of doing the job because of physical or mental disability, being kidnapped, being in a very serious accident. That's what they designed it for. It actually was on the heels of Eisenhower having a heart attack and other illnesses, and looking back at Garfield being after being shot 80 days before he died. Those types of things are what this was designed for. How it would work, you have to have the vice president on board to invoke the 25th and half the cabinet. And even then, the president can dispute. And if he disputes immediately, the House would have to take it up. The Senate would have to take it up. And you'd have to have a 2/3 vote in both chambers. So it's a much higher bar than impeachment itself if they tried to invoke the 25th. So now they've thrown that out there, got everybody thinking about the 25th. And then, by contrast, say, oh, well, forget it. We'll just go ahead and go do impeachment because it is such a lower bar. I would not have thought even 72 hours ago, Cindy, that there would be any chance of a 2/3 vote in the Senate to impeach the president over exercising his constitutional rights. That yes, obviously other people broke the law. He did not incite them to that. He said be peaceful. So and the case is ridiculous. I believe 50 senators would side with this false narrative. I did not think 72 hours ago that 17 Republicans would go along with them. But in the last 72 hours, we have seen the kind of Orwellian, or frankly, as you were saying with Josh, I mean, what we've seen in China, these are Marxist tactics of silencing people. So who knows how that will affect some of those senators who changed their vote on Wednesday because of these very things. Precarious times.
But impeachment's a pretty extreme step. What would it take for that actually to happen? I mean, it has to pass through the House, then go to the Senate. As you say, 17 to be 67%, 17 senators would have to go along with it. So what would that timeline look like? Is this even possible? I mean, they're not even in session right now. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, they're saying they're gonna try to roll things out on Monday. I suppose they could, adopt their own rules. I mean, the Constitution certainly allows them to. It's up to the House and Senate separately to decide how they want to operate and what rules they want to adopt. So, Nancy Pelosi with this very, I mean, the slimmest of margins that we've seen in my lifetime is going to try to push through these rules and try to have a hearing quickly enough, or at least a vote on impeachment. Now, don't forget, in the House, you only have to have a majority. So they've got that by 10 votes, 11 votes, maybe. I think one of the seats is still up it still hasn't been called. But a almost single digit majority, but they could still impeach. So I think what she wants the history books to write this story and say he's the only president to be impeached twice. Whether or not he'll be convicted is a whole other question. The impeachment is majority in the House, and then it goes over to the Senate like we saw them do last year with totally fake charges again. But it was voted down. Now they had at least a week or so there of an actual trial. I doubt they would even do that in this case. It would probably be a one-day slam it through the way communists would do it. Or frankly, I mean, people say you're extreme for saying this stuff, but this has caused me to read a lot about 1930s Germany. And this would be very similar to the way that they often prosecuted folks back then. So this is a shame. And for what purpose, right? What does this accomplish in what would end up being his final week as president? It does nothing but divide the country. It does accomplish their goal of silencing the opposition and getting people to be very timid and unwilling to stand up. And so I guess it does accomplish something, but it's something that's very evil when you think about what America stands for in terms of free speech and assembly and the opportunity to debate and have our voices heard and all of those things we used to stand for. What they're doing right now is very much against every one of those constitutional principles and American values.
Well, those are pretty strong views. Where do you think this leaves the states? One of the things, I've been thinking about is that, with the accusations of election fraud, they were never tried in any court or tribunal. We never got the evidence presented, and ruled on. The cases were all thrown out because of technicalities, this and that. But really, we are going to expect that the states are going to be looking into some serious election reform, and really it's in their hands. What signal do you think this is sending to the states and the rest of the nation, trying to, push something pretty dramatic through in the last days of Trump's presidency?
I'm so glad you raised that, because that's really where the hope is back in the states. And initially, even in this election dispute, that's where everything could have been solved if these state legislatures in these states had been able to convene. Obviously, some of them, had Democrat governors that did not want to convene to investigate or to send a clear message to Washington what they wanted for their electors. There were constitutional scholars saying, look, they had the right to convene themselves based on a plenary power to choose how electors are chosen. But anyway, they could have solved the problem. They didn't. The courts could have solved the problem. They didn't. They failed us, didn't even, as you said, hear these cases on the merits, all thrown out on technicalities. No one's actually heard the evidence. We got to see some of that Wednesday. And I think that's another bright spot that we could look at here, is that, the Constitution was played out in some ways here. We did have a chance for House members and Senate members to object. I thought Mike Pence, he did one of the things that he could have done under the Constitution and historical precedent, and he gave them a chance to raise their objections. And we got to hear some really good speeches and see a lot of evidence presented that most Americans had not seen yet. And it does send a clear message back to the states. You got work to do. We've got to tighten up these election laws. We've got to have very clear election integrity. We've got to have transparency in our elections. We've got to have a good verification process. And we desperately need legal remedies whenever the law is broken, which it was in so many of these states. So the states have work to do, and that means we, the people, have work to do. Citizens need to let their voice be heard in the state legislatures that are beginning to meet this week and next week. They'll be meeting for the next few months in almost every state. Gives us a chance to let our voice be heard with these legislators. They have a chance to tighten this thing up and improve the election law and hopefully also improve the emergency powers acts in most of these states. They're called disaster acts in most states. And look, we've got a federal government now that has socialists at the hands of every lever of power. And so at the federal level, we're going to see some pretty crazy stuff coming in the next few years. But don't forget, on November 3rd, and I think this may be, part of the reason they're going so far. On November 3rd, we had victories all over this country. We won most of the congressional races that everybody thought were going to be close. We won most of the Senate races that everybody thought were going to be close. We won legislative races to the tune of hundreds. It took a majority in additional state legislatures. So this was a very a much better election than anybody thought it was going to be. And we can take that momentum into 2022. If people that love the Constitution and love liberty are appalled at what they see right now and the silencing of Americans, both from a corporate level and a government level, intimidation for simply living out the Constitution, for simply doing, for Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz to be called seditionist and guilty of treason by their colleagues for simply doing what Democrats have done with every Republican presidential election of the last three. And what Nancy Pelosi herself called a few years ago, democracy at work. Barack Obama objected. It's shameful. It's hypocritical. But then again, we've seen it all year long. We see it now with the difference in terms of riots that burn cities and the destruction of property by a few hundred, out of control, both Antifa and Trump supporters. I know it's both. But the hypocrisy of how we're dealing with these things, how we're dealing with congressmen using their constitutional duties. If you're appalled by that, then step up, get active, get involved in your state legislature. The real battle for freedom and constitutional rights is going to be at the state level over the next few months.
So do you think there's that going on at the state level? Do you think the states are also concerned about the balance of power between the states and the federal government? And is there recourse for them there, or do you think they would take action in that regard in some way?
I do, yeah, and I think those conversations are happening right now. I mean, they're looking at what's happening, and they realize both that you have a federal government that's probably going to be unhinged for the next couple of years, but also just that we're a split nation. I mean, different states have different values now. We're not like what we used to be in the 50s. Even then, we weren't. America's never been just one value system, and the beauty of our form of federalism and having the states is that you could move to a state that more reflected your values. And this push from the federal government and this concentration of power in Washington, D.C. has tried to make everybody the same. That's a communist idea, to try to make everybody lockstep the same. Our idea is freedom. Let people live as they choose. We have certain constitutional rights and values that we all agree on in the Bill of Rights. But other than that, let them choose how they're gonna live. And so I think state legislators are seriously considering that, saying, okay, how can we first pull back power from the federal government? And secondly, how can we let each state kind of call their own shots on most things? And the feds only do what the Constitution says they can do. That's what we used to believe in. It was a constitutional republic. And our Constitution only gives the federal government 17 enumerated powers. All the other things they're doing are frankly unconstitutional. And the way to fix this, brilliant guy at the Constitutional Convention, he stood up on September 14th. His name was George Mason. He's one of the master builders of the Constitution. He's the father of the Bill of Rights. And he said, look, if the federal government seizes power that we haven't given them in the document, they're never going to give that power back themselves. We have to be able to take it back. And the way we take it back is the states being able to gather in a convention and amend the Constitution, come together as the states and amend the Constitution. And that's what Article 5 of the Constitution does. I think that's what we'll see happen in the next year or two. There's great momentum for that, especially after what we've seen over the last few weeks and, frankly, the last year.
Are those conversations happening in Democrat-controlled states as well? Or you're mainly thinking about Republican states?
Yeah, Democrat states too, because it's sort of the founders' design of use self-interest to protect liberty, and that's why we have separation of powers. So everybody's kind of protecting their own powers, checks and balances. So even in a Democrat state, legislators are thinking about, that was a really close election on November 3rd. And, hey, we do have 5 constitutionalists on the Supreme Court now, so we can't, make law at the Supreme Court like we've done for the last 50 years. So maybe we don't want the federal government to have power. I'm thinking like a Democrat right now that would say, hey, if we want to have the ability in our state of California or Massachusetts to call the shots here and not have the Supreme Court dictate to us how to live the way the Supreme Court has dictated to conservative states for the last 50 years, we better support this Convention of States idea, put the court in its proper place, put the federal government in its proper place, and let us states live as we choose. So I think you may be surprised to see some of those blue states joining red states, not to solve policy issues. That would not happen at a Convention of States, but to simply solve the process issues and the balance of power issues.
We've got to wrap up, but since you raised the Supreme Court, I just really want to ask this. If the Democrats go ahead with trying to pack the Supreme Court, adding Supreme Court members or something that would make it more than 9, do the states have a way to try to block that? Because presumably they wouldn't think that's going to work in their favor. That would be, putting more power in a system created by the federal government. So would they have some recourse there?
Yeah, in fact, it's the same recourse I just discussed, and there's historical precedent for that. The 11th Amendment was exactly that, overruling the Supreme Court very quickly, actually. They did it in just a matter of months. When the Supreme Court handed down Chisholm v. Georgia and the states disagreed with that, they very quickly amended the Constitution and said, no, you got that wrong. And so that could happen here if the Congress packs the court. It's another action of the federal government doing something. If they team up with Biden, who Biden and Harris have said they're going to pack the court. So if they pass a piece of legislation and Biden signs it and they suddenly add a bunch of leftists to the Supreme Court, then absolutely the states have the power to convene in an Article 5 Convention of States and overrule that law and actually have a constitutional amendment to roll us back to 9 justices and overrule what the federal government did there. I think it's a theme here. You asked that we initially talked about the states have the power with regard to election law. The states have the power here. We need to remember that the states have the power. State legislators are the most powerful actors, my friend Mark Meckler likes to say, when it comes to even federal law, if they'll use the power that the Constitution gives them, that the Founding Fathers entrusted in them, and then once again, we the American people need to entrust in them. They're the closest to us. You can get to your state rep. Everybody in this country could get to a meeting with their state rep, call them, go sit down with them, talk to them. So that's why you want them to be the ones to have the most power in these decisions.
All right, that's very interesting. My guess is most Americans aren't aware of this. So thank you so much for the civics education today. Thanks for joining us, Rick. I hope you'll come back.
You bet. I encourage everybody to take a good Constitution class soon. You need to know your rights. ConstitutionCoach.com is a good place to do it.
All right, thanks so much. Coming up after the break, the daughters of the KGB's most wanted man has something to share. Welcome back. We've been running a series of interviews on this show from Turning Point USA's recent Student Action Summit that took place in Florida. There, we spoke with two sisters, Vera and Mary, who grew up in the Soviet Union. They're the daughters of Pastor Joshua Bondarenko. He's a man who found himself on the KGB's most wanted list for remaining true to his beliefs, despite being repeatedly sent to the gulags because of them. Vera and Mary have a story they want to share with their fellow Americans.
We were born and raised in the former Soviet Union to a family that was considered to be the enemy of the state. Our father was on the KGB's most wanted list in 1960s, 70s, and 80s. And growing up as children, we're five in our family, and growing up in that condition under the Soviet regime was a totally different story as you see today. And we had never dreamed about ever escaping that regime, coming to live in a new country, and today it is a miracle for us what had happened to our family, that we in 1998 moved to the United States, California, and we are living an American dream. And today we have an opportunity to speak to people of beautiful and unique country that we love and have become our home, of the danger of communism and socialism that is being embraced by so many. Growing up in the Soviet Union, we stood in lines to get just necessities. And when people today talk about equality, and in the Soviet era, everybody was equal. We were dressed up kind of the same colors, same things. And, people were not even allowed to think differently than the propaganda machine of the media and the Communist Party was suggesting. So the reason our family was persecuted so greatly, and our father spent 10 years of imprisonment and served in Russian gulags, simply because he stood up for something he believed in.
Which was?
Which was his faith in God. And faith in God at that moment in time was discouraged from people, and not only discouraged, but persecuted. And he stood up as a young man because others were afraid to stand up for truth. He was a young man studying in the university in Odessa, Ukraine. He was just a village boy who was given an opportunity to study at a university, and he was accepted, and it seems like his dream was coming to pass, and he wanted to become a ship captain. He was studying at the Naval Engineering University, and at the same time he started to being involved with the church. He was warned several times that if he doesn't stop doing this, he probably will never receive a diploma. Before his graduation, he was called into a dean's office, and KGB agent was there, and he was given an ultimatum, and he said, "Joseph, you have to make a decision, because we don't believe that fanatics or a believer in a Soviet country is worthy of the engineering diploma. And you have to make a decision, and you're given just one night. And next morning, you will present your decision in front of the big auditorium of students." And it was a hard time for my dad, because his dream was to become a ship captain and to travel the world, because this was the only opportunity that would be for him to see the world. He struggled in his heart, and he prayed, "What should I do?" And then he knew clearly in his heart that he loves God and he loves the truth, and he doesn't want to see people being oppressed by the communist regime, and that he has to help people. And next morning, he stood up in front of 2,000 students, peer pressure, right? And he declared that he is not going to deny God. And at that moment, his dream just evaporated. He was expelled from the university and was never given another opportunity. And shortly after, actually for his Christian activity, he was arrested and imprisoned for 8 years. Communism regime always strives to brainwash young people. That was our dad's crime. He started leading and organizing an underground Christian movement so people would understand what government did to them and empower them to stand up. And he's become a national hero for many, many people.
Explain sort of the impact of all of that on your childhood and on the family.
I was born in 83. My father came out from his last imprisonment in 81. At school, I was praised by my teachers, but on paper, they lowered my grades. They knew I was the daughter of Joshua Bondarenko, who was imprisoned before for his faith, and now is an active leader in the free country in Riga, Latvia. And throughout my school years until we moved to this amazing country that we call our home, I was not much loved by my school and by my teachers, by some pupils also.
We as Christians were demonized, we were ostracized, we were looked at, we were considered to be black sheep of the society, and even our class at school, they would say, oh, Vera, you are that fanatic girl that bring our class down. And we were discouraged to believe in God because the whole country did not believe in the existence of God. We're so grateful to our parents that not only believed and stood up for what they believed, they portrayed, they demonstrated their faith so beautifully in our home on a daily basis, loving that enemy who betrays you, loving that KGB who comes to your home or police and throws everything upside down and then takes your dad away, let's say for us, but for them to forgive those people who mistreated us on every single level. And what the government did for us as children, they wanted us to turn our back on our parents. But even as kids, we realize that there is God, there is truth, and these adults, they don't know it because they simply went with the narrative of the Communist Party. Some of them believed in it very dearly. Some of them just followed to be accepted. And today, when we see so much correlation with the time that we had experienced, and now we're like almost, we live in California, but we live like now in the communist country. Every time I pull up in a parking lot by Trader Joe's, I love to shop my groceries there, I see a line, and like my blood boils. And I say, am I in America? What's happened with people? What is really happening here? And people are standing social distancing and all of this, like with masks outside. For me, it is compliance, the fear that they instilled in people. What Communist Party did then, they pinned specific groups against each other, like Christians against non-Christians, ethnic groups against the main, groups. So today, seeing these things, people walking like in line with every mandate that we have, almost like we don't have our constitution, we don't have freedom anymore. I have to do this, and that. And America has never been this way. America is so unique because of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. We, the people. So seeing these things makes us very concerned, very disappointed at times, and the ignorance of people that don't want even to receive the story that whatever you are aspiring to have in this country, such as socialism, we have already lived through. And we know how that works, and we see it.
Let's not forget about the church and what the governor has issued for the church. He wants us to be closed. He doesn't want people to go to church. We as a family have been through that. In the 60s, my dad had a choice, either to be silent, wait it out, and then things might have been okay for him. But he chose to say something. He chose to go against the regime, and he stood for his rights. We the people, there's no such thing in Soviet Union or ex-Soviet countries. There is no value for your life, and we have value here. We the people, we have the right, and we can do something. Because this is time where you decide where you stand. There is no more middle. There's no more gray area. You need to know where you stand, either on this side or the other side of the history. God is giving us time, and I believe if God is giving us mercy, we'll still have time to defend our freedom and our liberties. And I would encourage everyone to educate themselves. Look back, read the history, because history, we know, repeats itself. And this is a beautiful country where we live. There's no other country like America. And I don't want to lose it. Our family doesn't want to lose it. God brought us here, and we would love to still live in America. So I would encourage all my fellow Americans to fight for their freedoms, not just on paper, not just on social media, but to do it in person. Do what you can in your circle of friends, in your communities.
Those who come as immigrants to America, we have something to compare with. We have different systems that we have experienced. And I just want people to listen, to analyze, and be educated, and not only go with the narrative. So it is a joy to have both of our parents alive today, us 5 siblings, our spouses, our children. We are a very close unit. We're very close in our family. And that closeness, that huge spiritual heritage that we have received from both of our parents have really helped us build life on a very right foundation. It is important for all of us to be bold and stand up for our beliefs, because freedom never comes free. Somebody has to suffer that today we enjoy living in this country. And we admire men and women of courage. And I would encourage our listeners too to find courage to stand up despite the opposition, despite of what other people think of you, because what our family was promised by the KGB never came to pass, and God made a miracle that we came to this country to pursue our dreams and to be who we are that God wants us to be.
And finally, we're joined by Frank Andujo. He flew to D.C. from California on January 6th, just for the day, with his wife and daughter to join the rally. Welcome, Frank.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good
Thanks
morning.
for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I feel like you're pretty typical of the lot of people who were there at the rally. You're a working class family man. You traveled far and you made a big effort to come. Why did you come? Maybe you had to take 2 days off work to do it. Why did you want to go to DC?
Well, it was because for the last 4 years, I've watched Washington, all of them, the Republicans and the Democrats, try to destroy our president for doing the work that would help every single American. And he's been taking hits daily, lies, so many things that he's been put up against, and he never backed away from them. The least I could do was be there to, I know I was only one. Me and my family were just a few people that were there, but we wanted him to know that we were there for him and for the United States, for our country, and that's the reason we went. So,
what did you experience there? Maybe start out with the earlier part of the day. What did you experience?
It was great. It was everybody was peaceful. The speakers were great. Everybody was nice to each other. Everybody was just having a great time, being there and listening to what what the president and the other speakers were saying. It was just great. It was peaceful.
Did you have any sense of, in the crowd, was the mood at all? Did you see any violence coming, or was there any aggression or feeling of wanting to do something in an aggressive way?
None at all. None at all. We didn't experience any of that. We didn't see anybody. Everybody was just like, it was just like one gigantic family. It was really, really nice. Everybody was cordial, respectful, and excited to be there. And for so many of us to have been there, it was just exciting. You know, it was great.
So from Trump's speech, I understand you made your way to the Capitol like a lot of other people did. What did you expect would happen there?
We were thinking that either Trump was going to be there or there was going to be other speakers there, and just so that the Congress and the senators and everybody know that we're the American people. We just wanted to be there and let them maybe look out their windows and see there's hundreds of thousands of Americans here that want them to do the right thing, the legal thing, the moral thing, for our country. That's what we expected.
And so you're in that crowd. Were you aware of what was happening at the front and people, bashing their way into the building? People started walking back towards us, and they were saying, "Hey, there's people going in and breaking windows and stuff like that." And I'm like, "Well, where? We don't see it. Where is it happening?" Because we were right there, and when we started hearing the sirens and everything, and like I said, we were just getting information from people that were walking back, like they were just disgusted with what was going on, but we knew that because there was a few people that they were walking away from the Capitol, and they were like laughing, and they were just like we did it. They were saying we did it, like they had done something to destroy the beauty of what we were there to do. So you don't think those people were part of we? Is that
no, absolutely not. You could see that they weren't. The first thing my daughter had gone to the previous rally in Washington, and you had Antifa, you had the Black Lives Matter, you had and they were there. They were there in gigantic groups, but the Washington Police Department and the Secret Service and everybody, they had them on one side of the street, and then they had the Trump supporters or the peaceful marchers on one side. This time we didn't see that. There was nobody there. So right away we said, something's wrong with that. This is one of the biggest rallies this is the March for America. Where are they at? So we were kind of leery. So we knew that, and everybody was talking to each other saying, you know what, be careful, because these people are so lawless and everything, and that they and disruptive, that they might even be impersonating. They might have a MAGA hat on. They might have something on, carrying a flag. So just be careful. Just be careful. Just keep your eyes on your surroundings. And that's what we did.
And so how do you feel about what happened on Wednesday?
I feel bad. I feel that the perpetrators that did this made us all look like terrorists, and the fake news, and even some news that were considered fake news, were saying that everybody was there. We were protesting, that we're all terrorists. That's not true. That's not true at all. And there was so many people there from California. Also, we live in a liberal state. We live under lockdown constantly, regardless of the pandemic. We live in a state where everything is theirs, and we'll give you the crumbs, even though you work for them. So that's one of the reasons that we were there. Also, we were there to say, things have to change.
And I know that you're also a vet, so I
Yes.
assume going to the Capitol, means something. So how, from
Absolutely.
that perspective, what are your thoughts?
Well, I fought for this country. My brothers fought for this country. My father fought for this country. My uncles fought for this country. We all served. We've never asked. Once we left, we served. My brother has a Navy Cross for gallantry in the Marine Corps, and my dad fought in Korea, and I was all over the world. I just missed Vietnam, but Washington, to me, when I look at our flag and people don't understand that when you look at our flag, the American flag, when you've been in a place where you live with death from the minute you wake up till the minute if you're able to fall asleep, and you look at that flag, and that's safety, and that's goodness, and that's the good fight, and when you see your friends and the people that trained with you die for freedom, that's what our nation's capital means to me. That's why I was there, because I love this country.
So what are you hoping people understand about the situation right now?
That I'm going to say 95% of or more, the people that were there for the march, it wasn't a protest. It was a march. It was a march for freedom. That freedom is not free, and Washington needs to understand that they're killing the American people. They're killing the middle class. They're as a small business owner in California, I'm going to tell you, it's a daily battle, just to stay alive. Just to keep food in the refrigerator. This is not the America I grew up in at all, and it's just going in a direction that it doesn't even resemble the America that I know, and I don't like it.
So, what do you plan to do now?
Well, we're survivors. We're gonna get through this somehow, and keep fighting the good fight, and keep working, and keep teaching our children the morals that they should have, regardless of what's out in the streets and what the educational system tells them. It starts in the home. And we have to be strong, and we'll get through this. We're Americans. We've been through worse.
And have you been talking to neighbors, family members, other people that, maybe aren't necessarily Trump supporters or wouldn't want to go to a rally?
Oh, of course.
So what's that been like?
Of course, there's family members and friends that aren't Trump supporters, but in the end, they're Americans, and they say, I don't believe this really. What happened on the 6th, on January 6th, really happened like that. Even they're saying that. So, and without me telling them everything, they go, "Why'd you go? Are you crazy?" I go, "Oh, no, somebody has to go. Somebody has to make a stand. And at least for my family, I can say that we did everything we could. We voted. We're civil. We're lawful. We're patriotic. But we do have a life. I mean, we have a life that's being destroyed. Every year, it just gets worse and worse and worse. Instead of moving forward, this country is like going, I don't know which way it's going. It's just discouraging sometimes. But again, we're fighters, and we'll get through this.
Excellent. So, do you have any thoughts of leaving California?
We've been looking at, well, of course, we've been looking at Florida. We've been looking at, I was born in Texas, but I grew up in California. I was 1 year old when but I love California so much. It's just, I've been around the world 3 times, and been to every state in the union. And this state and this country is just it's just beautiful. It's just awesome. You know, I don't know, but we might. I'd have to have an ocean. I love to surf, and I was a sailor in the Navy, so you know, we got to have the water.
I understand. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and I wish the best to you and your family.
Thank you so much, and God bless you and everything that you do for us.
Thanks. That's all for tonight's show. Thank you so much for watching The Nation Speaks. Join us again every Saturday at 11 a.m. to noon Eastern. And from all of us here, have a good day.